Good day. Today we are going to do a very intense poem written by Wilfred Owens during the First World War. The poem is entitled Dulce et decorum est, but that is only part of a much longer Latin phrase, but we will look at that. I don't really want to go into that now. We'll go into that a little bit later on in our poem. So if you remember last year, we did our war poetry, and we know from our war poetry that Wilfred Owens was very much anti-war. He hated it with such a passion. And it's quite sad because he died 1 week before the end of the war. And this poem was written while he was in hospital recovering after some injuries in the trenches in France. So I would like to start by just summarizing the poem in about 2 lines. And I think I could safely say that the poem is about his personal experience watching young soldiers walking, trudging from place to place. So we're going to commence by reading the poem. Okay. Dulce et decorum est. Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge till on haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf to even the hoots of tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. Gas, gas, quick boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the helmets just in time. But somebody was still yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face, like a devil sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores or innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie. Dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori. Right. So right there, off the bat, we just begin with quite an intense poem, and I think that for you there are probably words which already just stand out. They just reach out to the reader. So this poem was published after his death in 1920. And I just want to talk a little bit about war. And we think, for your average soldier, why did these men enlist? And they enlisted because of patriotism. And it was so they go off to war, hoping that they will, yes, defend family, defend fatherland, British in this case defending king and country. But it is only once they are in the trenches and they come face to face with war that they realize the true horror of war, and that there is no glory in dying or being mutilated for someone else's cause. And so this poem is written in the first person. And we're going to see that many verbs are in the present tense. And of course, Owen does that very strategically because it enhances the realism of the poem. That means it makes the poem more realistic, because he takes the reader and he almost drags the reader there to the actual scene to see what is happening, not just on the battlefront, but specifically to one soldier. And it is an absolute horror. I think for us today, we are quite desensitized by violence. I think we have spoken about this on more than one occasion. We watch so many films depicting all kinds of blood and gore and all kinds of atrocities. And it almost bounces off us because we know it's not real. And I think if we had to experience the way Wilfred Owens did, firsthand, up close, these horrors, we would have a totally different outlook on life. So what Owen does in this poem is he describes what he has seen firsthand. He starts off in the first stanza, bent double like old beggars under sacks. When he talks about bent double, one, yes, they were carrying a heavy load, each person, each soldier. But these are young men who were fit and strong, and their experiences has reduced them to being bent double like old beggars. So we start off with a simile there. Old beggars thinking alongside the road, just sitting there, hunched over. The sacks, of course, are probably their supply sacks that they have to carry. Knock need. We've got alliteration going there. And it's also just testament to the way these men were walking. They were bone tired. They are exhausted. Coughing like hags. Another simile. Hags? What are hags? Hags are those old, ugly women, oftentimes referred to witches. Okay, with that deep cough that emerges from really deep down in your chest, the bottom of your lungs, that hacking cough that comes out there. Just think about it. Maybe you know of someone that just coughs in that really deep fashion. Coughing like hags. We cursed through sludge. And so they are cursing, they are swearing at their lot, at what they are having to go through. And of course, the sludge is referring to the deep mud. Remember, now they are there in all kinds of weather conditions. The trenches, which are so deep, are even were filled with the water, the rainwater, and it turns to mud. But now these are men that are just walking through the fields that have just turned into the sludge. Till on haunting flares we turn our backs. And so the turning backs, he's talking about retreating. Clearly they have lost too many human lives and they are forced to retreat. Haunting, it stays with you even though you have turned your back on it as the flares are shot up into the air. So I think line 1 and 2 really focuses on the pathetic existence that these young men have had or are experiencing. Bent double like beggars, old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we curse through sludge. And if we look at the pronoun, he uses we, so he was there with him. He's making this such a personal experience, and I think that's quite significant for us who are not there on the battlefield. And it's important to bear in mind that this poem was meant for the British, for those civilians back home. But we'll talk more about that by the time we get to our final stanza. In line 4, he says, and towards our distant rest began to trudge, walking heavily, slowly. You are burdened by your load, mental load as well as physical load. Mental load, I'm thinking the horrors that you have experienced during that part of the battle. Distant rest. There are no cars, there is no Uber. These men have to walk to a place of safety and shelter where they can rest and recuperate. Men marched asleep. I think that conveys just how exhausted these men. They were like somnambulists. That is a sleepwalker. It was an automatic action for a lot of them. It's simply putting one foot in front of the other. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots in the sludge, which was often so thick it would literally suck the boots off their feet. And who's going to now start searching through that mud looking for people? We are talking here about sludge, which is often not, I'm not talking ankle deep, I'm talking knee deep here. Many had lost their boots also because they are so tired, but limped on. So we have the word but, which contradicts the losing of the boots, because they don't stop because the boots are gone. No one is saying, I'm not going to walk any further because I don't have shoes. You don't have a choice. And so they limp on. And I'd like to link limped with a bent double, with the knocked knees, with the old beggars. It's such a contrast. It's a deep contrast to the image of young, fit, healthy, not even men, boys going off to war. They have been reduced to this. There were approximately 250,000 underage boys who enlisted in the British Army. So of course then you need to be 18 to enlist. But many of them were as young as 14. Just imagine what a shock, what a trauma to have to experience. But limped on in line 6. Blood shod. Shod referring to, in place of shoes, their feet are bloodied, often cut through socks. Socks are worn holes. You are, to all intents and purposes, walking on your bloodied feet, cut to ribbons. What a terrible ordeal. All went lame. Feet are injured. All blind. The young men can hardly walk. And the blind is talking here about the senses which are starting to shut down. There is only so much the human body and the human mind can endure. Line 7, drunk with fatigue. Fatigue is extreme tiredness. And drunk, of course, is being used metaphorically. You are barely conscious of what you are doing. You know, as humans, our basic needs are what? They are food, warmth, shelter, sleep. And if you think about it, sleep deprivation has always been an effective means of torture. And here these men, these young boys, are not being tortured per se, but they are forced to proceed, to stumble on to the destination. And it is a form of torture, is it not? Drunk with fatigue. Deaf. So we've got lame, we've got blind, we've got deaf, even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5 nines that dropped behind. So deaf. Now you know that we have played clips of the actual sounds of war, and a battlefield is a very noisy place. But it says here deaf, that's how tired they are, deaf, even to the hoots, that's the sound it's being made, hoots, of tired, meaning okay, I'll come back to tired, outstripped, to the hoots of 5 nines. So the 5 9 is referring to the 5.9 inches shells that are being fired, and these are the shells that are carrying the gas. Okay, now when he says tired in line 8, he means that the shells are being fired from so far away that by the time the shell gets to them, the shell is tired. And of course we've got a bit of personification carrying on here. Tired, outstripped, it's out of range. Okay, you know when a shell is fired, and clearly you know more about these things than I do. There's the trajectory, right? And then obviously it starts dropping before it actually gets to you. So it's just out of range. 5 nines, that's what they called the 5.9 inch shells that were dropped behind them. Remember, they actually left the actual battle front, the front line, and they are now marching because they are retreating. And then we go straight into the present tense. Gas, quick, boys. He makes it so real for us. Wilfred Owens, our speaker, is a soldier. Our speaker is right there experiencing this first hand. And when the sudden gas attack happens. They need to almost wake up. They need to take action. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about the gas, because the gas, we are talking now about chemical warfare. Most of the time it was chlorine. It was so damaging to it's respiratory. And so you inhale it and it damages your lungs, even dissolving, as we will read, your lung tissue. But let us not get ahead of ourselves. So gas, chlorine gas, quick, boys. Quick what? Quickly put on your gas mask, which they are carrying in their backpacks. An ecstasy of fumbly. It's a frenzied, crazy kind of action, because you know you've got to move quickly. An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the helmets just in time. So we've got fumbling, clumsy, we've got gas, and all these things together, they kind of tie together to convey that that sense of urgency. That's why it's repeated, gas. Okay, so the fumbling and the clumsy helmets describes how awkward, and it's not a smooth thing. It's quite difficult to fit on this gas mask, because it must go over the head. There are the goggles. It's attached to the long breathing apparatus, which is like a plasticky pipe. It's quite a story. Okay, so you need this to be fitted securely, so that this chlorine gas does not even seep into your mask. Okay, so he then says, fitting line, I'm on line 10, fitting the helmets just in time. But, again the contradiction, but someone was still yelling out. So there is one soldier who is unable to get his mask on in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering. We have the sense of panic that is rising in this man. He is uncoordinated in his movements, because he can't get it. Now, you know, the more you panic, the less productive you become. And so he just can't get this. He just can't get this on at all. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like, now the simile, like a man in a fire. Terrible image of someone caught in a fire, or lime. And of course we know now what the lime is referring to, because when they had so many soldiers dying, they would very often put them in mass graves. And the lime, it's you know, that white powdery stuff, and they would sprinkle it, they would spread it over the mass, over all the corpses, one for hygiene reasons, but more to dissolve the tissue. So think of acid just dissolving the corpses. And that's how it seems when the gas hits this man. That's how the gas is burning. Floundering like a man in fire or lime. He doesn't have his mask on in time. It's already starting to burn like a man in fire, because that's what fire does, isn't it? The fire burns very intensely. Stumbling. I think at this point he's kind of lost a sense of direction. Stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim. Now from line 13 to line 16, we are with the soldier, the narrator, the speaker. We are with him inside his mask, and we are looking out at this poor man, soldier, trapped, not man, boy, trapped in this whole gas attack. And so lines 13 to line 16 is the perspective of the person wearing, another soldier safely wearing his gas mask. And he says, dim. So you can't even see clearly because the goggle parts, they are just not even clear perspex or something. So he says, dim through the misty panes and thick green light as under a green sea. So again, we've got that simile there. He's comparing to the green light, the mist of this gas attack, the fumes, more like mist. And he's comparing that to being underwater, to being in a green sea. Okay. I saw him drowning. And you know, when you are underwater, it's like everything is thick, everything is slow. And I think when he talks even about the green sea, he's talking about this man feeling, this boy feeling, well, in some way like he's drowning. He says, I saw him drowning. And it's a very unsettling image to watch someone struggle, and you can see that their death is not far away. Okay, it's a terrible, terrible image. I saw him drowning, and the drowning is more to do, it's more respiratory. This gas, this chlorine has now entered into your lungs. Let's read on. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight. So he's also here talking about, it's a sensory image. He's talking about what he sees, but he says helpless, meaning there's nothing he can do even as he watches this picture unfolding. It's actually a nightmare, because he says, in all my dreams. And so he's talking about this image that keeps occurring. And they're not even dreams, they are nightmares. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight. What is the image? The drowning, the man's, the boy's lung tissue is dissolving. The acid is of the chlorine is dissolving his lung tissue. You know, in a funny way, it's making me think of Ebola. You know, when that virus, and you know that virus in Central Africa, when that virus enters your system, it also dissolves your tissue. And it's not just your lungs, as in this case, it is all your internal organs. And they start dissolving, and they literally bleed, and I'm not being American, they bleed out through all your orifices, any openings in your body, your eyes, your nose, your ears. They are just coming out in lumps, in watery bits, in chunks. It is a terrible, terrible way to die, Ebola. And it's making me think here when he says, in all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me. And again, plunge, you can plunge in the water, right? So it's that same, we're connecting the under a green sea, we connect with drowning, we connect with plunges. And plunges here is a rapid, violent, uncoordinated movement. underwater. So it ties together very, very beautifully. He plunges at me. Now look at all these descriptives, and they are all present tense. Guttering, choking, drowning. I want to look at guttering because guttering brings to mind the image of a candle. And when the candle is guttering, it is flickering, it is about to go out. And when he uses, remember, poets choose words very, very carefully and very deliberately. So when he talks about guttering, he's actually implying that this man, this boy, will not be living very long. Like a candle, his life will too be extinguished. Choking on the fumes, can't breathe, struggling to breathe. Drowning, again that sense of underwater. So we had drowning in line 14 and drowning in line 16. The whole repetition, the whole emphasizing that sense of helplessness. Okay. We go to the next stanza. I think stanza 2, in a way, is probably the worst stanza in this poem because the description is so intense. Us as readers, we cannot remain detached when we read of a man, of a young boy coming this close to death. And so that is the effect that Wilfred Owen wanted for his people back home. Now let's go to stanza 3. And he says, where was I now? Right, line 17. If, it's a conditional connector, if. And I'd like to connect if with the word you in line 17. If you, okay, if in some smothering dreams, and smothering, suffocating, just that struggling to breathe, okay, if in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in. And so it lets us know what happens to this poor soldier. He is one of many who is picked up and thrown very unceremoniously. I won't go so far as if to say like garbage, but just carelessly, no dignity, no honor, thrown into the wagon. And so our